So this morning we heard from Ollie Robbins, and we heard that Number 10 had a, quote, dismissive approach to vetting. Do you think that's good enough from the government?
Well, I don't accept that there was a dismissive approach because the day after Peter Mandelson was announced, given his appointment, which was made on the 20th of December, he was actually emailed to say that an official would be in touch regarding his clearance. There was another email that was mentioned as well that he was told he'd be going through the vetting process, and it was one of the most important first steps. So vetting, I think, was clearly at the heart of this appointment, and I think he was aware.
Wouldn't it have made a lot more sense to have done these checks before giving Lord Mandelson, a man with quite a checkered history, the job in the first place?
Well, look, I think, the Prime Minister has reviewed and strengthened the process. It cannot be right that any official thinks that they should not be flagging any concerns with the Prime Minister or the ministers, because they are fundamentally accountable to the House and they're accountable to the British public. But I do think it's important to note that actually it is quite common where appointments are announced that vetting takes place afterwards. Sir Ollie also told MPs that that was actually normally the case. This was certainly not a one-off. This has been a process that has existed, it appears, on many appointments.
But this is a career civil servant that we're talking about here, a man who's served many governments of different colour and different parties, saying that he had, quote, a strong expectation coming from Downing Street that Lord Mandelson, quote, needed to be in post and in America as quickly as humanly possible. This was a man put on unrealistic pressures, wasn't he?
Well, look, I think, what Ollie clearly said in the evidence he gave to committee is that he is not somebody who would bow to pressure from anyone. And he was confident that his team were actually handling the process quite well. And this is coming from him. I think, he was well aware that the inauguration was going to take place of President Trump. So clearly there was some kind of time pressure. But the fact that he did say that he wouldn't bow down to pressure, I think is quite clear.
Do you think that during this whole saga, that, quote, full due process was followed?
Well, look, I think, we've got to be clear that there is a UK vetting process. It is right that it's independent. It's got to be independent because we need people to cooperate. Equally, we need to make sure that sensitive information of any person that's part of that process isn't shared across Whitehall. And there's got to be confidence in that process. And I, respect that principle. But, you do have to ask questions on what basis did Ollie Robbins make a decision that he did not then need to flag concerns about somebody failing vetting, not the content of what was in the UK vetting agency's concerns, but actually to be able to flag to ministers and Prime Minister? I think that's quite an absurd position to be in. When I was out on the doors, certainly people were quite shocked that it was even a process. And I think many of us were quite surprised too, because in the end, it's ministers and the Prime Minister that's accountable to the House and accountable to the British public. So how is it possible that any official would think that actually they don't then need to flag concerns? It's not about sharing the detail. It's about flagging simply that there was a concern in the system.
Keir Starmer stood in front of the House and said 3 times that full due process was followed. Now, it may have been done inadvertently, it may have been done and the Prime Minister didn't want to mislead the House, but doesn't it look like that when the Prime Minister said that full due process was followed and Lord Mandelson had passed his vetting for the job, the House was nonetheless misled?
Well, look, Keir Starmer made very clear in his statement that he had asked the then Cabinet Secretary, Chris Wilmot, to review the process, and he did do that. At no point was it flagged with him by Ollie Robbins or that there was a concern in the vetting process. So absolutely, what Keir Starmer relied on is even when he did ask the questions, even when the process was being reviewed, he was told that all those processes had been followed. It has only come to light subsequently that there is a process within the Foreign Office where if somebody doesn't pass the vetting, then they can override clearly that decision. And that is the information that Keir Starmer has found out. That is what he has changed immediately, so that no official should be able to have that level of, autonomy to undertake such a decision. Because in the end, even Ollie Robbins is accountable. And how did he decide that it was in his gift not only to make a decision and then have mitigations to address that, but how did he think it was not right to raise that with the cabinet secretary when he was asked to review the process, or every other opportunity that existed for when these questions were being asked?
Are you not the least little bit worried or concerned that there seems to be a culture that has developed in Downing Street in which either people are too scared or just don't want to tell the Prime Minister the uncomfortable truth?
I think, one of the things that this does highlight is clearly there was a culture in the Foreign Office where this is probably seen to be a norm. So I don't know how many times this has happened where, somebody's gone through the vetting process, there needs to be mitigations or there's been flags, and how many other times that they have actually put in place a plan, for example. And clearly the previous government will know much more about that culture. But of course, every government will inherit a culture. And, what this Prime Minister and his cabinet have been trying to do is restore trust back into politics by making sure that there is accountability in the system, but equally making sure that officials are very, very clear as to what is expected. Now, there's been a lot of things, speculation about, the culture within the organisation. At the end of the day, the civil servants are there to serve the British public too.
This is a wider thing than just the culture within the civil service, isn't it? Because in opposition, Keir Starmer said that he's not the sort of person that points a finger at people beneath him. He's the person who takes it on the chin himself. Well, in this circumstance, it's Ollie Robbins who is very much having the finger pointed at him. In the past, we've had Sue Gray. She was a person who wasn't up to task and has left office. Matthew Doyle, he's a man who wasn't up to task and now left office. Morgan McSweeney wasn't up to it. He's gone because of Lord Madison. The Prime Minister, who not an issue with the Foreign Office. This is an issue with the Prime Minister, who always finds someone else to blame except himself.
I served in Keir Starmer's shadow cabinet. I worked very closely with him. He's a man of great integrity. He takes his public service duty really, really, seriously, and he wants to go on and deliver for the British public. Now, this will be as frustrating as it is for him as it is for anybody else. In the end, he's got to rely on officials and the people around him to carry out the task or the job that he's asked them to do with honesty, and to feed that back. Now, every organisation will have issues like this. Leadership is about addressing those issues. Clearly, some of these individuals were not fit for the jobs that they were given, and they've had to go. And this is a Prime Minister that's really, really clear that he will not sit and wait and let these things continue to fester. He's going to take decision. He's going to change the process, because in the end, he wants to deliver for the British public. We've got a cost of living crisis. We've got a war in Ukraine and Iran, and people are looking to him to help them ease some of those issues that they are facing.
He's got to rely on that team around him, but doesn't all this show that this is a man who's pretty bad at picking that team? Ollie Robbins is the latest to go. We've had 2 chiefs of staff. We've had a couple of cabinet secretaries. We've had God knows how many director of communications that have had to go. He's very bad at picking that team, isn't he?
Well, look, the first thing he did was apologise about appointing Mandelson. He made it very clear if he had the information, he would never, ever have appointed him. So I think, he's been very, very clear about his position. Now, look, many of the British public, when I'm out on the doors, are not talking about this issue. This is a very much Westminster obsession about individuals that people don't even know who they are and their names don't exist. It doesn't mean much to them. They've elected a government to serve them. And what they want to see from this government is delivery on the issues that we had in our manifesto and the issues that they are grappling with at the moment. Now, I hear what you're saying around judgment. The Prime Minister has clearly taken responsibility. Most of the public, when I speak to them, value the fact that the Prime Minister is prepared to do that and then move on and try and address the other issues that he has been elected to do. So I do think it's an unfortunate situation that, there have been individuals around Keir that, have not understood this is a man of integrity And if you are not adhering to the Nolan principles and you're not governing with integrity, then of course he is going to dismiss you.
Preet Gill, thank you very much for your time.